I believe there's a campaign of gaslighting and misinformation perpetrated against the three gentlemen that you see in this image right next to me. They are the leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. In my opinion, this campaign is designed to destroy the reputation and ultimately replace these men in return for leaders that will be favorable to external interests. If you're interested in understanding what I think is the latest and most blatant example of this, stay tuned. So for those of you that don't know, my name is TJ. I'm Nigerian and British mixed. I'm currently living in Uganda, which is a new experience for me as I've mostly grown up in the United Kingdom. This move has challenged me in ways I never expected. And one of the ways it's challenged me is my perspectives on some of the things that's happening on ground in Africa. One of the things that I've been forced to confront is the ways in which exterior to Africa powers seek to gain resources and control over the continent of Africa. You see, this week, the man you see in the middle, Tchiani, has become president of Niger. So here on the continent, that is being celebrated. But depending on who you watch, what news outlets you see, the story can be much different.
Our next story is from Africa, from Niger in the west. The country made global headlines in 2023 because of a coup. Niger's military overthrew their democratically elected president in the name of national security. It's been 20 months since then. Security is still down in the dumps. Terror attacks are more frequent than before the coup, and the country is heading down an all too familiar path. The leader of Niger's military junta has declared himself president. His unelected term will last 5 years at least, because apparently the term is flexible.
So everything in the delivery of this introduction is painting this president in a bad light. They're already using subtle and perhaps not so subtle ways, plus the beliefs that you may have already in your head, to paint a picture that this is a bad thing and you should not want to support this man.
The same story that keeps playing out in Africa and beyond.
The same story that keeps playing in Africa and beyond. Let us remember that line.
These are scenes from Niger in July 2023. The military was orchestrating a coup. They were detaining the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum. The people on the streets were thrilled.
Why were the people thrilled? If the country was doing so well, why would all of these people be thrilled? But of course, they shouldn't be thrilled. They shouldn't be happy because a dictator is about to take over and ruin their lives, according to this story.
They were angry at their government for failing to put an end to terrorist attacks in the country, and for allegedly being pawns of France, Niger's former colonial overlord.
France have an agreement with Niger called the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, which spreads into Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and in fact all 14 French-speaking African countries.
14 of those countries, they said, in order for you to get your independence from us, you must sign this document. You thought they could have found a better name for the document. The document was called the Pact for the Continuation. I repeat, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. We're going to demand that you deposit 85% of your bank reserves under the French Central Bank, under the control of the French Minister of Finance. France is then going to take your 85% bank deposits from each and every one of you. Deposit those funds in the French stock market under the French name. And you may or may not know the returns.
How many people do you think would enjoy another country have an agreement with them of the continuation of colonization? So let us just not say it's alleged. Let's just call it what it is. The French have massive control and influence over this region.
So, the people of Niger thought military rule would be better. That's why they were celebrating the coup.
What happened was they were fed up. So someone had to do something about it, and the military stepped in.
Niger's military is certainly no pawn of the French. That part seemingly held true. But on the terror front, the junta has proved to be worse than the old Bazoum government. Terrorism has been on the rise. which was to be expected.
So this terrorism they're talking about is the radical groups that we find all over this part of Africa. In Nigeria, it's Boko Haram. They are well-armed military groups that maraud and do all kinds of terrible acts, such as kidnappings, taking of wives by force, often of young girls. These are the issues that this country is facing. And what they're saying here is that, okay, you've got rid of your president, and now look, terrorism is on the rise. You are hurting the people more than the previous regime.
Because the junta got rid of a coalition of Western forces, anti-terror forces, led by the French and the Americans. The move was great for optics. It helped to reinforce the anti-colonial narrative, but fewer boots on the ground was bound to help terrorism thrive. It seems this was the price the people of Niger had to pay.
Is that the price that the people of Niger had to pay? So under the previous regime, Niger had to sell their uranium for 80 cents to France. France had first refusal on many of their resources.
The French were getting Niger's uranium for 80 cents per kilogram, and the world market price is 200 euros per kilogram, which is what little Macron will have to pay from now on.
Deals like this are a clear example of neocolonialism that means that the country itself can never prosper. So to say that the price they're paying is terrorism is to totally ignore the predatory practices of resource stealing that was happening under the previous president. So the price that they're paying is the release of these predatory acts. So you might say, okay, well, they can't control the terrorists. But now another deeper and darker question happens. If only there was a group that was highly financially incentivized to create the downfall of the newly appointed government, who might that be?
Niger has had a full-blown face-off with its former colonial ruler France. At the 79th UN General Assembly, the junta-led nation accused Paris of funding and training terrorist groups in the Sahel region. These allegations were leveled by Niger's Foreign Affairs Minister, who denounced France's new recolonization strategy.
Now, this viewpoint is not pointed out in the story that we're following here. All we're hearing about is the failures and the downside and all of the negative parts about this new development of presidency.
Niger's military junta has been hyping this up, appealing to nationalist pride and finding excuses for their abject failure to deal with terror. They keep blaming everyone else for their failures: France, the US, even other West African countries. Simultaneously, the junta keeps expanding its own power. They made a fresh power grab yesterday.
From this moment on, the President of the Republic of Niger, Head of State, Army General Abdurrahman Tchiani.
The junta chief, Abdurrahman Tchiani, was officially declared the president of Niger.
When I was living in the West, I would look at Africa and I would say, you know, what's terrible is when you have these dictators, these strongmen that are in charge for many, many years. But what I've come to understand is that just because there's one man in charge and he's a quote unquote dictator doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for the nation. You see, these cultures in Africa are not like cultures in the West. There are tribal differences. There are all sorts of local problems and issues that do not apply to the West. And there's still the remnants of colonial problems. So yes, democracy can be a great thing and democracy can work. But sometimes a leader that has the nation's prosperity, growth, and well-being at heart can also be very effective. Nobody, for example, complains about Lee Kuan Yew, who is single-handedly responsible from turning Singapore from a poor ex-British colonial country into one of the wealthiest countries in the world. He was in charge for 31 years. This is evidence that it can work when a single person who has the best interests of the country takes control and does a good job. There for sure are a long list of negative dictators, but I ask you right now to pick your poison. But what's happening in these Sahel region countries is that they are taking the decision to say no more to colonial, neocolonial, and predatory rule.
The junta chief, President Tchiani, was officially declared the president of Niger. The coup leader is now an unelected president, and he will remain so for 5 years. At least, that's what they're saying right now. The junta chief's term depends on a number of factors, including what happens in the neighboring countries Mali and Burkina Faso. All three nations, Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso, are ruled by military juntas, and their juntas have banded together into a group called the Confederation of Sahel States. They all seem to be following the same playbook too. First, they orchestrate coups, and then they promise to return their countries to democracy within a short transition period.
So why don't we see if they do it? Why don't we see what the production of the country is? Why don't we see what the effects of these guys are? Why don't we see what the results, what fruits they bear? If you go and look at the GDP of these three countries since the military coups have happened, you will see an absolute explosion. They're building hospitals, they're building railways, they're building schools, they're building houses. They are selling their products to the global market way higher than they were before. Currently, these three guys, particularly Ibrahim Traore, are the most popular men on the continent of Africa. They represent the continent of Africa attempting to free itself from other people's interests. And until news stories start reporting this fairly, balanced, and equally, these narratives pushed by the mainstream media that everything they're doing is bad needs to be checked. Agendas need to be analyzed. And I'm not saying that we should just blindly accept what these leaders are doing either. But what I'm saying is that when we listen to the news, the narrative spun by them does not always hold all the information, and we need to be very careful as to what we attach our allegiances to.
It's just the latest example of what happens when you let a military dictatorship take root.
So they've decided that this will never work, it won't happen, and you should also think that too. You should just let your country be pillaged under the name of democracy, under the name of puppet leaders. You should just allow the wholesale, decades-long continuation of colonization agreement to persist. Stop listening to these narratives that are there to influence you and gaslight you about how a country should work in Africa, particularly if you've never paid attention to the history of a country like Niger. And now, on the back of a few minutes of a news article, you might form an opinion because of a narrative that promotes a particular agenda. I'm sure you guys may have many opinions and you're free to put them in the comments section. But if you have nothing to say, could you put the words "Free Africa"? Just to let me know you've watched the video to the end, you're supporting the channel, and you like what I'm doing. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.